The Ho-Chunk people lived on this land for thousands of years before 1853 and 1854, when 3 pioneer families began to settle the land that is Pope Farm Conservancy today. Before then, the land was owned by Genevieve Grignon. In 1829, as part of the Treaty of Prairie du Chien, she received 1 square mile of land from the U.S. government. Genevieve herself probably never lived here. Later, her daughter sold this land to a Frenchman who subdivided the land into 8 80-acre parcels. He sold 3 of these parcels to newly arrived families from Mecklenburg, Germany. The first pioneers that purchased these parcels were the Harloff, the Brackenwagen, and the Siebert families. When these 3 families arrived on the scene, they found themselves in a wilderness, surrounded by deer, prairie chickens, rattlesnakes, and howling wolves. And as if this weren't enough, they were immediately faced with 3 gnarly challenges. First, they needed to secure a place to contain and feed their animals. Second, they needed to build themselves a temporary shelter. And finally, they needed to plant and grow food for themselves and their animals. These 3 German immigrant families all owned a team of oxen. Oxen are far more powerful than horses and were needed to pull trees, stumps, and stones out of the ground, as well as plow through the tough prairie sod. As a temporary containment to keep the oxen from wandering off, they probably used interlocking brush piles as corrals. As these families got settled into their new surroundings, we believe other relatives and other neighbors probably helped them as they built their primitive log cabins. Sharing with neighbors was a common trait in the Mecklenburg community. This meant that many adults and children shared very small spaces, often in their one-room log cabins. These cabins were about 15 feet long by 15 feet wide, with a ladder leading to a second-floor loft where the children slept on straw bedding. The bathroom was an outhouse in the yard. The Harloff, the Brackenwagen, and the Siebert families built their own cabins along what is now Old Sauk Road. Each cabin took about 4 to 6 weeks to build. Typical log cabins had only 1 door and 1 window. Log cabins provided shelter from the harsh Wisconsin winters and were meant to be a temporary home. However, some of these families lived in their log cabins for years. And finally, what about food? It's most likely that the pioneer farmers on this land planted their first crops in the low areas along what is now Old Sauk Road. These farmers also cut the prairie grasses to store and feed their animals during the winter. Large gardens and orchards were planted by the women and children to provide vegetables year-round. This harvest was stored in their root cellar, which is an underground room that served as a refrigerator. For meat, they hunted deer and prairie chickens, or slaughtered one of their animals that could be salted and stored in barrels. Even when these pioneers had food and shelter, there was plenty more work to be done in the winter. When you consider what it took for these pioneer families to start over in a new country and within a true wilderness, it's an amazing feat. They enjoyed none of the modern inventions and conveniences we enjoy today. What they did have was a strong community around them that supported their efforts and understood all too well they were in it together.